My name is Joyce. I'm a program manager at Reverting, and I'm very happy to moderate this new format of the Decentralized Mics today. So for those who don't know, originally it was focused on recipients of the Decentralized Future, which is a grants program from the Web3 Foundation for the Polkadot ecosystem. And now we're expanding this to include voices from the whole Polkadot ecosystem and even go further and really collaborate with other blockchain networks, making this a hub for meaningful conversations. In those decentralized mics, you're going to hear discussions around interoperability, decentralization, DeFi, and the evolving crypto landscape. And today, we're going to talk about a very foundational piece of decentralized ecosystems, and that's governance. Governance really determines how blockchain communities evolve, how it funds innovation, how it responds to challenges, and also how it builds trust. We're going to talk about the importance of governance and the adoption. We're going to talk about participation of voters and how AI is influencing this nowadays. And we're also going to look into plutocracy and the future of governance models. In order to get into the details of all of that, we've gathered some of the brightest minds in the field to share their insights with us today. So yeah, if you would like to introduce yourself, please, Bill, Lane, and Christine. But instead of giving us the formal resume today, I would really like to, to each of you to answer 3 questions that I have in your introduction. So the first one is, what blockchain network are you representing? So tell us a little bit about what it does and what it's focused on now in 2025. Then the second one is, what inspired you to contribute to blockchain governance? So I really want to hear your personal story and what drives you to keep in that space. And then give us a little glimpse into your day-to-day work in governance. So tell us, what are your core activities and responsibilities, so that maybe you inspire someone who is watching here to also start a career in governance. So Lane, if you would start and then just hand it over.
Thanks, Joyce. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me, and hopefully I made a mental note successfully of your 3 bullet points.
I can repeat them, so no worries.
No, well, okay. I'm gonna try, and I'll try to keep it brief as well. So I'm Lane Rettig. I work for Near Foundation in a research capacity officially, but what I'm really focused on right now is launching a novel governance initiative for the Near protocol called the House of Stake. And we could talk, I'm sure we'll have plenty of time today to get into what that means, but it's a brand new initiative that actually just launched last year. My motivation or passion for this topic, so I previously worked on a number of other projects, including Ethereum and Space Mesh most recently. And I was part of the Ethereum Foundation from 2017 to 2019, officially as a software developer, as a core developer. But what I found at the time was actually that like the technical side of the project was very well served, right? There was and still are a lot of very bright technical minds working on that project. And I felt that, proportionally speaking, what I could contribute on the technical side was less than what I could contribute on kind of the social side and the governance side. I had really only just experience as an entrepreneur previously to that. I had been running a healthcare technology startup for a few years before getting into this industry. I have an MBA, so in business school, we studied a little bit about kind of corporate governance. That was really the extent of like my experience with governance prior to that. But yeah, I guess I just kind of like dove in. This was, around 2018, 2019, became very deeply involved in a lot of the Ethereum governance mechanisms at the time. And that's actually when Christine and I first crossed paths. She was also involved back then. I guess I saw that, blockchains are just people at the end of the day. I guess that's what it boils down to. Like the technology side is critical and is important and it's exciting and interesting, but like these things just don't work if they're not built on a strong social foundation. I guess that's what I would say. And so I felt that piece was less well served at that point in time. And we could argue maybe it's still the case today. We can get into that. In terms of a day in the life, it's really, really new what I'm doing because this initiative just launched very recently. So we're very much in a coordination phase right now. My job is really a project manager where I'm just coordinating with a lot of different actors throughout the Near ecosystem and beyond. We just recruited an initial set of delegates for our project, and this included some teams and some folks that have been very active in governance of EVM projects and some layer 2, some DeFi things like that. So I'd say I'm still kind of in the initial research phase, but we'll be moving into like an operational phase really soon. Did I get all the questions? Was that it?
Yes, you did. Maybe let's continue with Christine.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to talk about this topic, blockchain governance. It's my favorite topic by far. I work as on the research team of Galaxy. Galaxy is a crypto financial services company based out of New York. I focus my research primarily on Ethereum protocol development and governance. I started focusing on this way back when I used to be a tech reporter for CoinDesk. I found that the Ethereum governance calls, the ACD calls, these are weekly. Now they're weekly. They used to be biweekly, but now they're these weekly gatherings of Ethereum protocol developers, client teams, researchers to kind of discuss and make decisions about how the protocol of Ethereum should evolve. And these calls were severely undercovered. They kind of still are. I think there's like two reasons for this. Number one, like the nature of the content is very technical, so it's not like a large audience could really tune in and get a lot out of it from the get-go. And second, I think because there's so much of exciting stuff happening on Ethereum, sometimes the base layer and how the base layer is changing is a little bit underrated because of how exciting kind of the trends are that are happening on top of Ethereum. I think back in 2018, there was so much excitement over like new protocol launches, new ICOs, new DeFi protocols that were mainly taking up all the headlines. So that's really why I started covering the ACD calls. I wanted to explain these like technical topics to a non-technical audience, try and bridge that gap, and also illustrate just how important governance is, like how important changes and the evolution of Ethereum is to all of the rest of the ecosystem. So that's what I'd say like really inspired me to do this. I found that it was a very underreported kind of like area of Ethereum. And yeah, that's what I've been doing for like the past, basically since 2018. For now at Galaxy, truly what my day-to-day looks like, at least the part of it that matters for this conversation and for Ethereum governance, is I basically tune into those ACD calls. Like it's an hour and a half on Thursdays. I'm on the YouTube live stream, taking notes, transcribing the call, and then I write like a summary of what happened, which everyone can find on galaxy.com. And I also share some more opinionated, like pointed takes on what I think are the main important points of the call through this podcast I host called The Infinite Jungle. So I would say those are probably my two most important contributions to the governance side of things when it comes to Ethereum. Yeah.
Thank you. I listened to your podcast recently.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So let's go over to Bill.
Yeah, hi, I'm Bill from Web3 Foundation, representing Polkadot and also its wild cousin Kusama. So Polkadot and Kusama are both networks or systems of blockchains. There's actually multiple chains that are involved in each of these ecosystems. Governance has always been very important to me. And in fact, I mentioned Kusama, which has been known as Polkadot's Canary network, but we actually just used governance on that network to decide it's going to be more independent and an experimental proving ground for ZK technology. So yeah, governance has been very important to Polkadot from the very beginning. Governance is really built in, and also to me. So my background, my undergrad degree was actually computer science and political science with a focus on formal political theory. So it's like I was really made made for this stuff even back in the 90s. I was preparing for it even if I didn't know it. So as for sort of my day-to-day life, as a director of Web3 Foundation, I have a lot of different projects, and not just all governance related, but in terms of governance, some of the things we do are just coordination, looking at the referenda, what's happening, We run the Decentralized Voices program, which delegates Web3 funds to people, since Web3 Foundation deliberately chooses on most referenda not to vote. Yeah, there's a lot of talking, coordination, and because governance is very important and very strong. Actually, like everything in Polkadot is controlled by governance. Really, keeping an eye on what's happening there, being able to talk and discuss over the many referenda that are occurring. We've had over 1,500 on Polkadot and over 500 on Kusama. So a lot of work there to do just to keep up with what's happening in governance.
Yeah, sounds like a lot. Thank you all. So to set the stage and really get into the core of everything that we're going to discuss today, I would say we start with the basics first. So I would like to know how the governance model is currently structured on the network that you're representing today. So is it on-chain, is it off-chain, is it hybrid? And what is the core philosophy behind your network's governance model? So what principles guide how decisions are made, and how does this reflect the values of your ecosystem? Christine, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So everything, I would say like 99% of governance for Ethereum is off-chain. Very little of it is kind of supported on-chain. There is no on-chain voting for decision making. All of that happens through kind of informal processes of consensus making. I would say there is a core organization that spearheads these forums for where governance can happen. So the Ethereum Foundation is a really core player in creating, facilitating ACD calls where the Thursday kind of developer meetings happen. But they're also very pivotal in also creating like other breakout sessions for different initiatives that might not be related to changing the core protocol of Ethereum, but is very related to research initiatives or parts of the Ethereum protocol that don't require like a hard fork to activate. So yeah, and I would say that for decision making on Ethereum, one of the challenges, of course, of everything happening off chain is it can be very difficult to follow along because there's not like a clear, this proposal was approved because it got 90% of votes, and this other proposal was rejected because it got 10% of vote. Like there's nothing that clear cut, which is why developers try really hard to do all of their work in the public domain. So all of the changes, all of the decisions that are happening either on public Zoom calls, on a public GitHub, on a public Discord research and R&D channel. I would say that the strongest values that I see in the way that Ethereum governs itself is definitely openness and transparency. Those are really seen in practice. When you want to double check why a certain decision was made, it does require a bit of searching on Google, a lot of listening to many different live stream public calls, but all that information is out there, and that nothing is. At least developers try really hard for no decisions to be made behind closed doors. And I think one of the other values that I really appreciate is that because all the forums are public for where decision making and discussions happen, that means anybody can join in. Anybody can join the ACD calls. Anybody can join the research R&D Discord. So I appreciate this value of kind of openness, but also trying to decentralize, trying to encourage other voices and stakeholders to get involved into governance. So that's kind of how I would describe the Ethereum governance in a nutshell. It's informal, off-chain, but entirely open.
I'm remembering a few specific examples, Christine, when I was part of Ethereum governance and decisions had been made. And exactly as you said, sometimes we forgot like exactly why the decision was made or exactly how the decision was made. And like I remember very specifically going back, I think these days we have transcripts of the ACD calls, and obviously, notes from yourself help enormously. But there were a few times when, I was watching, a number of these videos on 2x, like trying to isolate the specific spot where this topic came up, and it was always a challenge. So that's one downside to this type of decision making.
Yeah, I mean, even when I cover these calls, sometimes I'll say a decision was made, and the response will be like, no, that decision wasn't made. But it is up to interpretation, right? Do you think that that was the way, that was the outcome? Yeah, I think it's a really, it's a governance process that is very open to interpretation.
Yeah, just to be clear, it's called rough consensus. That's always the term we used. And there is actually like an RFP out there. I can't remember the number for it from IETF it involves the rough consensus and running code model that comes from IETF, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it's a messy process, but it's designed that way for a reason.
Yes. It's very hard to game for this reason, in that it's not a system that anyone can capture very easily. It's not something that anyone with like any ETH whale wouldn't be able to step in the room and immediately be able to take over any decisions. Because everything is happening through rough consensus. So you do have to be, if you want to have a credible voice in the system, you do need to have the work to show for it. People need to know who you are, what you've done. And it really is a merits-based kind of way of evaluating whose voices matter the most in the system, which again is open to interpretation many times, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe Bill, do you want to show us like the other extreme? Because I know that Polkadot, everything is on chain. So
yeah, actually, Christina, it's really funny hearing you say that, because Polkadot has exactly the opposite philosophy, right? So everything happens on chain. All referenda are actually little snippets of code that automatically get executed if they pass. And you can see, all right, this person voted for this, and this percentage voted for this, and this executed. And that has its own advantages. Some of the things like being open, all of this is on chain. You can't get more open really than that. You can't know what the people are thinking, but you can see what they're doing. And the other benefit is like you don't have this rough consensus. You have a consensus. If this occurs, then this occurs, right? If we say this is going to occur, there's no dependence on outsiders. There's no nuance. But this also has problems, right? They're one of the things. So just I think of always we have these vote nay referenda because somebody essentially wrote the wrong code to execute for a referendum, and so you have to say, okay, go we have to do this differently, so don't vote nay on this one. So the philosophy of Polkadot really was always to put the power in the hands of the dot holders, right? So we've actually seen this on Kusama. There was a runtime upgrade that actually was voted down because the KSM holders thought they didn't have enough time to implement everything. This was a change in some of the cross-chain communications, XCM. And so so it's interesting. This is a different approach, right? Like you said, like it's a very merit-based approach that people won't pay attention to you if you don't have like a good technical background, and you can't make arguments well. Whereas Polkadot really has the opposite approach in some ways. Like that, obviously yes, you can convince people, but if you have a lot of DOT or KSM, it's really an economic incentive to make sure you understand what you're voting for, as opposed to other people thinking what the merits are directly of that. So obviously, again, people can off-chain communicate, and this happens. There's a lot of off-chain communication, and there are programs like Decentralized Voices that help give voices to people that are very active and understand the ecosystem well. But yeah, I would say the philosophy is very different. Instead of saying this rough consensus and running code, which I know is like the IETF and the Ethereum Foundation, we really said, all right, let's formalize this. Let's put everything on chain and really just like dive headfirst into on-chain governance.
Yeah, thank you. So Lane, would you like to tell us how Near approaches all of that?
I'm so happy both of these extremes exist, by the way, just because we're learning so much. I mean, so much of this industry today in general is an experiment. And I think these are important experiments that need to happen, where at the end of the day, just groups of humans trying to figure out how to coordinate and, make decisions together. And so again, I think it's so valuable and so important that all these experiments are happening. So Near has a very state-of-the-art sophisticated governance system called BDFN. And if you don't know what BDFN stands for, it means benevolent dictator for now. Which is another way of saying that, despite the fact that it's a very mature network and protocol, the network's been live for quite some number of years. I think it's well run. I think it's well governed. I mean, I'm biased, but it's a very healthy ecosystem. The technology is very, very sound. And by the way, I should just say I did a terrible job of introducing Near earlier. So Near is a sharded blockchain, right? So I think we just recently increased the number of shards from 6 to 8. And so that means that Near has a really infinitely sort of scalable amount of throughput, which I think is very important given the kind of applications and use cases that Near is going towards. I think it's the most widely used kind of sharded design that I'm aware of. We're very focused on AI applications right now. So we have a subsidiary called Near AI, which is a separate company that has a number of products and services that are being developed. It's a for-profit company. We're working on a lot of decentralized infrastructure for AI, and the Near founders are kind of AI OGs, right? So like Ilya famously co-authored the Attention All You Need paper, and Alex as well, deep expertise in being an early employee at OpenAI and Google, Microsoft, et cetera, before all that. We also have an intense pillar as well. So Near is very much about kind of like tying together applications across multiple chains. We have an Omni Bridge project that allows you to kind of move liquidity around using this Near intense thing on the back end. So there's a number of different kind of unique pieces of technology that kind of work together to make kind of Near protocol and network what it is. With respect to governance, right? So I said earlier, benevolent dictator for now, right? So there have been a few attempts, one notable attempt about 2 years ago called NDC, the Near Digital Collective, to create a more formalized governance system. And it didn't go very well, to be very frank. A number of mistakes were made, and I'll just keep this brief for now, but we can go into it if we have more time later. I think the biggest mistake was that it was an attempt to do a democratic system. Okay, so unlike what Polkadot Kusama are doing, unlike what Ethereum does, it was an attempt to kind of square the circle in the sense that we wanted to have the decisions made on chain, but we wanted to avoid plutocracy. And so plutocracy is the most common pushback against most forms of on-chain governance, right? That, as Christine said, it's very difficult if you're an ETH whale to like sway decision-making in Ethereum, because that's not how Ethereum governance works. And democracy on chain is very hard. And again, I'll spare you the details for now, but that experiment didn't go very well. And so we're kind of starting from scratch right now. We are obviously learning from the things happening in Ethereum and Polkadot, and exciting things happening in Solana right now as well. And honestly, many other projects. A lot of the kind of DeFi protocols have really exciting governance things happening. With respect to kind of like values and principles, to be completely transparent, I'm pretty new to the Near ecosystem. I only joined a few months ago, and Near is a very complex ecosystem. I don't want to attempt to speak for kind of the entire ecosystem. But I will share my own personal perspective, and this is evolving, and we're figuring this out as part of this brand new House of Stake initiative. I think actually the place I'm starting from is simplicity, right? So I want to put that out there as a potential kind of guiding, philosophy for governance design. What I've seen personally in a lot of the projects and DAOs that I've been a part of is that there's this attempt early on to get everything right from the beginning. And I think that NDC fell victim to this a couple of years ago. NDC had multiple houses as well, with kind of systems of checks and balances. And again, these are very attractive ideas, and obviously they come from kind of default world governance. I don't know that many of them translate really well on chain. I'm actually very curious if Polkadot's had any experience with any of those things. I know that there were some of these checks and balances in the original designs. I'm not sure how many landed in production. So we're trying to keep things very, very simple. So we have just a few days ago chosen our initial set of delegates. It's only 11 to start, which I think is a very small number when you look at the hundreds, or in some cases even thousands of delegates in some of the larger protocols. And we're going to really limit the scope of decision making. So there will be on-chain voting. It will be token weighted, right? So we're inching in that direction. But again, trying to kind of narrow the scope and starting with just things like grants and some economics specifically. We have some hard economics questions we have to deal with. And these are things that like our core developers are not particularly well suited to handle. And again, I have like same experience when I was working on Ethereum as well. I think there should be like people with governance expertise and economics expertise in the room for those decisions specifically.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, Bill, do you want to say something to that? Because like we know that the OpenGov, it really like evolved over time. So I don't know, do you want to bring us back to how it was before and like how it evolved nowadays, and what are the benefits of this new model, and also what are the challenges that you have with that?
Yeah. So our first, like many blockchains, actually, we also had this benevolent dictator for now. At first, we did have a sudo account the first few months of Polkadot's life, and then moved to what we now call Gov1. Which had a council which could control the treasury. We had a technical, oh shoot, now I can't remember the name, but basically a very small group, three accounts that could change the speed of referenda. So it was a more complicated system. Now it is essentially 1.1 vote, and there are different tracks that that you can use. So there's a root track that can do anything, and that's very hard to pass things on. There's a small tipper to give up to 100 DOT from the treasury. That's very easy to pass things on. The only exception, to this 1.1 vote system is that there is the Polkadot Technical Fellowship, which has around 64 members in it right now. And they can basically what we call whitelist a referendum on a certain track, and it passes more quickly. That's all they have power to do, essentially, is make things help pass more quickly. They don't have any extra power over the network. So as we've gone on, we have definitely reduced the complexity of the system. I would say it's still more complex, but in terms of like I see the Cardano system of governance, and they have like all these different checks and balances, and like you said, I think that doesn't work very well for a variety of reasons. We can go into in the blockchain space. I would say the big reason is politicians, that is their full-time job, right? You have civil servants. It makes sense to have a more complicated system to get the benefits. That's more difficult in on-chain governance, when really one of the concerns is just people. You need to get people to participate, and if it's too complicated and you have too much overhead, there's no participation. It becomes really a game for insiders.
Yeah, good that you mentioned voter participation. So I would like to know from Christine, so how does Ethereum's off-chain governance model address voter apathy? And do you think that, I don't know, something like delegated voting or any kind of mechanism like that could be integrated into Ethereum's governance in future? Or do you have delegated voting?
No, definitely no delegated voting. No voting with your tokens at all on Ethereum.
Yeah.
And I don't foresee that changing. I think in the realm of on-chain governance, there still requires quite a bit of experimentation, quite a bit of battle testing before these governance systems can scale. I think for now, Ethereum's governance is slow moving. It is a murky process. It is clunky and hard to navigate sometimes, but it works. And it has shepherded and it has allowed Ethereum to grow into what it is today. And it is very flexible in that it has evolved as the ecosystem of Ethereum has evolved, as different stakeholders. Before Ethereum was proof of work, they didn't have stakeholders such as staking pools and Lido to consider, whereas now they do. And so I think it's hard for me to see how a token holder version of governance could work and apply to Ethereum. I think that one of the cool experiments that I see in the governance realms, especially related to DAOs, is futarchy. This is kind of another take of using token holder voting, but to put kind of every vote, you need to put your money where your mouth is a little bit, and it kind of forces people not to vote in a very like willy-nilly way that I find very interesting. But of course, again, these are kind of experiments. I don't know if any of them would work on the scale of Ethereum governance. So yeah, I mean, on the topic of voter apathy, I would say that's more of a problem with token-based voting, because everybody who holds tokens has to have a say whether they want to or not. They'll delegate, they'll do, if you have a token, you have a say. Whereas for Ethereum, I would say the apathy it's a little different. all of the client teams, because they're spending so much time, so much resources like invested into the protocol, they really are invested in governance. They really care about the decisions that are being made. So is, if there's a particular code change that good developers are considering that will heavily impact staking pools, that's when we see kind of a lot of action and a lot of voices coming from stakeholders. I think most of the participation in governance is when the code changes really matter to you as an ecosystem participant, regardless of how many tokens you hold. The governance system is very flexible in being able to account for those voices. I do think, though, that there is definitely a communication issue where some people don't know that these decisions will impact them. And that's where people like me are really trying to step up. That's where I think, the communication, the information really needs to get out there better. And I know it's not just me, but there's just so many, I think, other I think as the value of Ethereum as a protocol grows, those people that try and explain the governance and the importance of governance will also grow naturally. So yeah, that's kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of things, but I hope that answers your question.
If I could just add one quick thought. Thank you, Christina. Yeah, definitely agree with everything you just said. Just connecting back to something I said earlier, what I saw as a core developer and as a participant in Ethereum governance was that there's no issue with technical issues. Like you said a moment ago, if there's some proposed code change, core developers, the development teams are very hands-on and they're very active in the discussion and decision-making process. But what I saw many times, and I'm wondering if you still see this, was that when the nature of the question at hand is less technical and more social, which could mean many things, right? I mean, economic is the most obvious example here, and economics has a social component as well as a technical component, right? There were many times when I just remember the call was just silent. We'd throw out the proposal and say, we have this EIP on the table. Does anyone have any comments or anything? And it'd be like a minute of silence. And we're like, okay, I mean, we're going to go ahead with this if no one, because the way that rough consensus works is if no one raises any objections, then kind of it's the decision is up to the person leading the session, but the default action is often to accept it. And so there's a form of apathy is what I'm trying to say on the part of core developers when presented with things that are not strictly technical. And I wonder what we do about that.
Yeah, it's a good point. I do think that it's changed the governance system and the approach of developers in shying away from non-technical matters has shifted quite a bit over the years. I think it's primarily because many of the voices are no longer strictly technical voices. I think there's a lot more stakeholder participation on these calls. And I think the client teams themselves are not strictly just working on the protocol anymore. And so I think that also raises a lot of questions about conflicts of interest of developers, I guess, aside from, but even if you work, I was going to say aside from if you're, say, part of the guest team and then really all you're working on is the protocol. But as we've seen with many not many, but with certain Ethereum Foundation employees, there's also conflicts of interest of depending on what projects you are advising for or not advising for. There's vested interest. So I think developers are less shy about diving into those topics. Very recently, I think one of the conversations was about lowering issuance so that the rise of liquid staking tokens can be curbed a little bit. And that was, that raised a lot of discussion from the staking pools, from client teams. So yeah, I think finding a resolution is really what's still hard, though.
Yeah, I remember there are topics that just hung. I mean, the most obvious is ProgPow, right? That was just hung in the air for as long as a year. Like it could never be. This is one of the issues with the Ethereum governance process. There's no mechanism to ever shut anything down for good, right? It's just that it doesn't pass, and then someone brings it up again a month later, and it's the gift that keeps on giving. So that is one of the flaws of the system, I think.
I mean, I will say it is those people that bring things up like 1 month, and don't give up. Those are the people that are really keeping Ethereum alive, I gotta say. I think it sets the bar high in that if you're really only there to kind of make a quick buck and kind of, push through an EIP, and if it doesn't go your way, then you're out. I don't know. I feel like that's also a good way to kind of weed out bad actors in the space. Yeah, I know some people that have been trying for the BLS precompile. Whoever is championing that precompile, you've been championing it for like over 7 years, and now it's finally getting into an upgrade.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of idiosyncratic reasons things take time. I mean, just the way that updates are bundled together, sometimes it just doesn't fit, or one change is a little bit too large, or it needs to wait for other changes and things. So I see what you're saying. It's a form of proof of work, right? That
It is. It
continually kind
really
of
is.
championing these issues. Yeah.
It is. And one thing I'll mention, and sorry I'm taking up so much space, just one thing I'll mention about the time is oftentimes governance is not a black and white decision. So developers in Ethereum's history have gone back on the decisions. Very recently, Petra was going to be like this 20 EIP upgrade. They made that decision and really like confirmed that consensus on multiple calls. And lo and behold, 2, 3, 4 months later, they're like, actually, we're going to split it up into 2 upgrades. They split it up into 2. They were like, we're going to have these EIPs. 3, 4 months into the process, they took out some EIPs. I think, Constantinople is another really great example of, when upgrades don't go as planned. Governance is, I think, human coordination. And even when we see just like politics, like it is very gray. There's so many gray areas and kind of decisions that sometimes get reversed or sometimes get changed along the way. I'd be curious, Bill, to also know kind of like what is your guys' process for like reverting decisions and for like kind of quickly acting in cases where you find that there's a bug in this upgrade. Like how do we gotta, is there emergency like councils and kind of safeguards there?
Yeah, it was really funny for you to say like, well, nothing is ever black and white; it's always gray. And Polkadot really tries to make things as black and white as possible, right? You can vote, aye, yes, or nay, no on a referendum. Upgrades occur actually quite often, and then they're either yes or no, either the upgrade goes through or not. And so, as opposed to like, well, we're gonna there are these decisions like you say of like, all right, well, are we going to add X, Y, or Z into an upgrade? But usually, that's all happening off chain ahead of time. So I guess the question is like, what happens when there is an emergency? And this I would say actually is one of the harder things about having a decentralized system. There's a lot of off-chain communication. Occasionally there is a bug found, like there was a bug in the staking system found very recently within the last few weeks. And then essentially, in order to make things pass more quickly on Polkadot, you need more voting power. So the idea is, if you think about this and sort of add extreme examples, right? If 100%, every dot holder has already voted, and it's 100% in favor. Why do you have to wait the full 28 days, which is as long as a referendum can take on Polkadot? It's essentially a curve. Depending on what you're trying to do, these curves are different. And so when there is an emergency, essentially there's a lot of off-chain coordination to tell people, hey, this is really important. We need to vote on this referendum, get as many dot as possible voting on it. And so we have again a lot of off-chain communication to vote things quickly. This is not going to be as fast as having, like just, a centralized server where we can upgrade things, or like, a very small, a relatively large, validator set. And it's not up to the validators, what code they're going to run, since the code for the chain is actually on the chain itself. And so really, when there is an emergency, there is a lot of off-chain coordination that occurs to make sure that people vote for things quickly. So, and again, I mentioned like there is this what we call whitelisted track, where this Polkadot Technical Fellowship can essentially put their stamp on it and say, okay, this can pass a little more quickly, but it's still a process. Things are not immediate. But I think that's really for any chain, right? If there's a bug found in in Geth or something, you need to go tell everyone to go, hey, go upgrade your Geth code, etc. So, but that's how we deal with emergencies. That does require some off-chain coordination, but the actual activities all happen on-chain.
Gotcha. This reminds me a lot of the Tezos blockchain. Were there learnings from like kind of the way that Tezos did their governance? One of the things that I found kind of interesting when they were first, I feel like they were pioneers in doing everything on chain, was they marketed it like it's an unforkable blockchain, a blockchain that is not able to have like social consensus like chain split. Curious to know, I mean, when you guys were ideating this structure, what were some of the learnings from
so I wasn't there.
systems?
I wasn't there in those very, very earliest days. So I don't want to like say, oh, specifically we got this idea from Tezos or not. But that being said, right, like there definitely are some similarities, right? That the code is on chain. There are some differences and some learnings from that though. So we also we have forkless upgrades, as we call them. Like, you can technically have, you could theoretically have some sort of split, but that really would require a spoon instead of a fork. You have to, migrate your state because the chain would no longer be valid from a certain point. So it's something that really, in theory, I guess could be done, but has never practically been done and is unlikely to actually be done. But one thing I'd say we learned from Tezos is separating staking and voting. Right. So with Tezos, essentially, I forget what they call them, bakers, I think. You instead of validators, right? When you're validating, you're nominating or delegating one of these bakers, they are voting on your behalf. But and I believe actually with this latest Solana vote, that was also similar. Like the validators sort of voted on behalf of the people validating, nominating or delegating to them. And Polkadot, these are two entirely separate processes. Because it doesn't make sense, right? I may think that Joyce, you're great, at running a validator. I like that you produce blocks, but I want to make decisions about where the treasury is spent. Or maybe I trust you, Lane, for technical decisions, but I trust you, Christine, for like treasury economic decisions. So I want to delegate differently. So I would say this is a big difference between us and Tezos. Is just that these are staking and validating, that is an entirely separate process from governance. And you can give your vote to a validator if you like, or to anyone, right? You can delegate them on your behalf, but that's not necessary to do.
Great. So as we don't have much time and Bill needs to go exactly at 3, I would like to know if there are any other protocols that has an interesting governance model that caught your attention recently. Let's start with Lane, maybe.
Sorry, just failing to unmute myself there. It's a really tough question. It's funny. I remember very often people ask me, I would start talking about the flaws I see in various governance models, which that's what we do as governance researchers or designers. It's just like you have a beer with someone, that's what you talk about, the spectacular ways that each of these systems could or have actually failed. And then the question would inevitably come up, like, who's the exemplar here? Like, what is the positive example you can give? I've really struggled for a long time to kind of give positive examples. I mean, as I said, I really think that we're all experimenting here in different ways, and all these experiments are important. I don't think anyone has cracked the nut yet. And I'm not surprised. I mean, this is a problem that humans have been working on for thousands of years. So I don't think we're going to necessarily solve it, in the next 10 years. I'll throw one out there. I think Aave has very interesting governance. I really like the Aave initiative. I think that they've done some really exciting things. I think it's a big, important protocol. It seems, I'm not super deep in it or super active in the system, but it seems to be a very healthy governance initiative, something I want to understand better.
I don't know, maybe Bill or Christine, do you guys want to add something here?
Yeah, I will. I'll congratulate Cardano. They recently moved to on-chain governance, and I found it actually quite interesting because they, again, had a very different philosophy than Polkadot. They have a constitution written. They have these a much more complicated system, and I said some of the reasons that might be problematic. This a complicated system in governance as opposed to a more complicated system in a real world governance system. So it's very interesting. I'm curious. It's interesting seeing how things are evolving there already. But like what Lane said, no one's cracked the nut. I actually think I don't know that we're ever going to have a fully cracked nut, right? So again, I actually did mathematical analysis of political systems as an undergrad. That was my thing. And there's something very famous. I don't want to get too much into it right now. Arrow's impossibility theorem, which basically says that, I'm paraphrasing here, there is no perfect governance system. You try to think of some things that are everyone prefers A over B. something that seems like very simple to come up with a governance system. And it turns out it is essentially impossible unless you are the only person in that governance system, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I think what we're going to see is just like, there's no perfect blockchain, right? There is no, this is sort of one of the core tenets of Polkadot, right? Is that we have all these different parachains, roll-ups that have some are good for some things and worse for others. Some are better on other things. And the idea is that, again, I don't think there's going to be a perfect governance system, and something that works, really well in one ecosystem may end up working horribly for another for a whole variety of reasons. So I do love that there are all these experiments, that there are different teams trying different things out, but I don't think we're looking for perfection. We're looking for evolution and making things better.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say I'm so happy that you have this this background and you've done the homework and just I did not have that background, and I have really tried hard to get myself caught up on things like political philosophy. But it's good to know there's some adults in the room sometimes when we talk about these topics. So thank you.
I feel weird being called the adult in the room, but I guess I am getting some gray hair, so it makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, that it's not about finding the perfect governance system, but about finding a governance system that is better than what we've had so far and keep pushing the ball forward. Joyce, to your question, I think on the front of on-chain governance, what I find is pushing the ball forward is incorporating futarchy into governance. But on the front of off-chain governance for blockchain protocols, one of the protocols that I think is very under-researched and under-reported on is the Bitcoin Core protocol governance. I am guilty of this too, because Bitcoin doesn't have hard forks. People may mistakenly think that Bitcoin does not have governance, but this is not true. Bitcoin does have an extremely diverse ecosystem of stakeholders that, very similarly to Ethereum, is also trying to make their voices heard and what should happen in an upgrade. And for Bitcoin, these upgrades are all always backwards compatible. So there's different values that are guiding these discussions, and also very different methods of upgrade activation, where if we think about is it Taproot that recently went live? That happened over the course of miners kind of slowly building up enough weight to activate that upgrade. So I'd love to do some research on those different methods of soft fork activation, and also do kind of more research on the front of how Bitcoin governance is very likely to change in the future with all these Bitcoin as a platform, with conversations around OpCTV, OpCat, these new opcodes developers want to implement, and of course a hard fork that, whether Bitcoiners like it or not, will have to happen to upgrade. I think it was their Unix code stamp or something. In 10 years, there's definitely going to be a piece of the Bitcoin protocol that needs to be updated through a hard fork anyways. So I'm curious for the kind of reporting on that governance to kind of ramp up over the next couple years, and to see, just a whole new, to uncover, I guess, just a whole new ecosystem of what's going on with off-chain governance in the realm of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, could I just jump in for 1 second here? So, as an old time Bitcoiner myself, there have been contentious hard forks. Most famously Bitcoin Cash. And if you're interested in this sort of stuff and how governance decisions are made in Bitcoin, 2 great books. One is The Block Size Wars, which is all about this Bitcoin Cash split, and Bitcoin: A Work in Progress. It's by I can't remember his name now. He's a Dutch guy that runs the How Bitcoin Works podcast. It's called Bitcoin: A Work in Progress, which covers this. It's really, really great book. So highly recommend it.
Nice. I'll definitely check those out.
Thank you, Bill. So looking now into the future, right? We see AI emerging everywhere. So the question is here also, how do you think will AI impact governance on blockchain, governance models on blockchain? Do you think it will neutralize bias? Do you think it will introduce new risks? Or what is your take on AI and governance on-chain, off-chain, in blockchain?
I can jump in. So we're AI maximalists at Near. It's probably fairly obvious from the description I gave earlier. And one of the reasons I signed up for this role in this project is specifically because I wanted to get caught up on AI, and specifically I wanted to explore the intersection of AI and governance. Joyce, directly to your questions, I think the answer is yes to all of them. So, I mean, the bias question is very interesting. Let me rewind a little bit. So we have a 3-stage process that we're using here for rolling out AI in the House of Stake. Initially, we're building something very straightforward, which is an assistant, right? We think of this as a GPT-like tool that the human delegates, the human governors of the system can use as they write proposals, as they review proposals, as they vote on them, et cetera. It just provides a helping hand. Obviously, this can be built right now. Stage 2 is an AI delegate. I'm very excited about this. We're going to start working on this very, very, very soon. So this is like a Q2, Q3 project. So I said earlier, we have 11 human delegates. We're going to be rolling out one initially, but hopefully multiple AI agents that actually act as autonomous delegates with agency in the governance system, and people can actually delegate their voting power to the AI delegates. So that's an experiment. I believe we have the tools. We need to do this right now. We'll see how it goes.
Can I ask you one question regarding that? So like some days ago, I was listening to a podcast and they were also talking about AI and how like in future, they could be like governance bodies, but like outside of blockchain, we're talking about like presidents and so on. And they were talking about like how these AIs would make decisions that are just so complex for us humans to understand. Yeah, so kind of like, yeah, what would we do with that? Do you see that also as like a potential risk in blockchain, to have like those AI agents that are like, they just understand things in such a complex way, and they have this kind of like alien intelligence that like we as a human would not be able to understand, and would be kind of like risky to let them take those decisions?
Well, you're really going to love the third piece here. So the phase 3 is AI CEO. So Ilias had a vision for a long time of actually building a single agent, I guess you could think of it as, that sort of takes over the governance of the entire protocol. And so, phase 1 is imminent. Phase 2 is soon. Phase 3 is like someday maybe. So it's a risk for sure. I mean, I can't remember what it's called. There's an area in AI research. I think it's called explainability or something, right? Like how do AI tools, AI agents make their decision processes known and understandable and legible to humans? Or maybe it's called legibility. I can't remember. I'm not an expert in this area. Other AI experts probably have more to say on this. I think for the scope of decision making that we're going to be using these tools for initially, I don't foresee this being an issue. I mean, we're talking about allocating grant figures, grant dollars, and we're not even probably using it to make deep kind of protocol changes right now. And my personal experience with the AI tools and agents I've been working with is that actually, especially the new ones, like the DeepSeek style models that give you the thinking, I don't know if you've had a chance to play with that. It actually like walks you through its thought process, and if you really like follow it closely, it's pretty incredible how logical it sounds. So I think that for me, that personally is less of a risk. I think the bias factor, which you alluded to in your question, is a bigger factor. I think the reason I'm excited about AI governance is because in theory, these tools, these agents, an AI CEO can be less corruptible and less biasable than a human actor, because obviously all humans are biased and corruptible. That's the lesson of history. But in practice, that remains to be seen. As we know, the training sets are biased themselves. I know we're short on time, so I'll just stop there. I want to hear what the others think.
Yeah. So I'll just say quickly, one thing we're already using AI for, and I think we're going to see more of this, is like summarizing and verifying what's happening on chain. So again, I mentioned, so one thing is just like, hey, there's a billion comments. What are people mostly saying? And it'll give you a 1-paragraph description. But something also I think is interesting, because remember I said that every referendum on Polkadot is really a bit of code, which is not always human readable. And so the AI can actually tell you, okay, this is what it's going to do in English, or maybe in other languages as well. But I mostly see them in English.
Very, very similar to your comments, Bill. Like for Ethereum, everything is happening off chain, but it takes a lot of manual work sometimes to summarize what happened on the calls, to post the summary onto GitHub, to share and repost it to Ethereum Magicians Forum. And yeah, I think personally, the way I see AI really transforming things is to reduce the amount of manual work that doesn't really require any human, or requires not as much, I guess, like human creativity or human agency. I think there are definitely ways to make governance a lot more understandable and a lot more efficient by cutting out some of the tasks that a human has to do, but maybe an agent can take that over, and that just frees up more time for humans to do what they do best at, which I know is still philosophically a question. What is unique about humans? I know that's a question, but generally, just leaving it out there, that's how I see. Hopefully, I see agents having a purpose in blockchain governance systems.
I think you make a really important point, Christine, which is that there's a lot of like boring, backbreaking, laborious work involved in governance. I mean, you are more aware of this than anyone in Ethereum. I remember this from my days with like the ETH cat herders, and we were doing all the things you talked about, transcribing calls and translating them. And and this is what, by the way, this is one of the reasons that apathy is an issue, right? Because people think about getting involved in governance processes, and it's like so much bureaucracy and overhead and boring stuff. So for sure, I agree with you completely. If AI agents do nothing more than reduce that burden, they will have already done a lot, right?
Yeah. Ideally, if AIs can do the summaries of the calls, that would be great.
Great. So to close up, I would like each of you to say goodbye, and maybe just say one thing that you think is important for anyone who is listening and watching to take on from that call.
I guess I'll go first.
I want to jump first. Yes.
Thanks again, for having me on. This has been really interesting. And I would say, like, my advice to anyone is just to jump in and try it, right? So, on Polkadot, go vote, go read something on Polk Assembly, people arguing, go listen to some of these calls, on Ethereum, go, check out these AI agents on near this voting AI agent, which sounds really cool. Actually, I want to look into that. But like, just like, you see what's out there and, try it out, and try different ecosystems and compare, because it is like, there are a lot of really cool experiments going on, and jumping in head first is often the best way to learn things.
I agree very strongly with that. I was super active in governance back in like 2018, 2019, and then I got a bit burnt out by it, to be completely honest. And so I kind of decided to focus on other things the past few years. And as I've gotten back into it now, these past few months, I've done exactly what Bill is saying. So as we were, going through the designs for House of Stake and what we're doing in Near, I was like, okay, I need to roll up my sleeves and I need to engage in these existing governance projects. And it was actually very straightforward. I wanted to participate in Uniswap and Arbitrum and a bunch of others. And literally, like, I just had to buy $10 worth of tokens for each of these respective projects, and go into their governance forums and begin participating in voting and things like that. I mean, obviously, I don't have a lot of voting weight, but that's not the point. So I think we live in a really special time when these governance systems are open and permissionless and participatory, and exciting experimentations happening. Get involved for sure in all those projects. And if the intersection of AI and governance sounds exciting, I'm Rettig on Twitter. My DMs are open, always looking for contributors and co-conspirators. Christine, you can have the final word.
Oh no. I think one thing that I hope listeners will take away from this is that the importance of governance is very tightly intertwined with the value of public blockchains. Depending on what you see as the value of a public blockchain, be it a public good, just another open source software, perhaps a platform for, a specific use case or application, that the value of a blockchain will not be able to really flourish or even be sustainable if there is no governance model to oversee the development of that blockchain. And so to the extent that those values are reflected in governance, we started off this entire conversation about what values are driving the governance system. I think it really harps back to what is the value proposition of the technology that you are developing, and that will greatly inform governance and kind of vice versa. And so I hope people recognize the importance of this discussion into like the value of the entire crypto industry.
Great.
Well said.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you guys. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.